Uh, Thank you all so much for having me. I'm Rachel Lauter. I'm the executive director of Working Washington and the Fair Work Center. We're a Seattle-based multi-industry workers' rights organization that fights for new rights for workers, makes those rights real through community-based enforcement, all while building a grassroots movement to change the conversation about income inequality and the dignity of work. We have a long history of making transformative demands and winning big for some of the hardest to reach workers, like domestic workers and fast food workers. And we're now taking our work to the gig economy with what we call our Pay Up campaign. The widely observed growth of the platform-based gig economy has undeniably expanded flexibility and opportunity for millions of workers and consumers across the country. It's kickstarted the creation of new markets for labor and consumption, which we previously haven't seen or have previously not been so accessible. It's also generated vast amounts of wealth. But the people who do the actual work on these platforms are not sharing in the wealth. These are the workers who complete delivery of food and groceries, deliver packages, other tasks like at Handy and TaskRabbit. And they experience low wages, tip theft, complicated pay algorithms that change all the time, limited pay transparency, and they also lack access to a social safety net. We've analyzed pay on a couple different apps using data that we've collected directly from hundreds of workers. On the Instacart app, which is a grocery delivery app, we've found that on average, workers are making $7.66 per hour after accounting for basic expenses, and so mileage and payroll taxes backed out. On DoorDash, which is the food delivery app, pays even worse. It's about $1.45 an hour. That's well below Seattle's minimum wage, Washington's minimum wage, and the federal minimum wage. And I wanted to pause and talk a little bit about coronavirus, because I think that the poor conditions that these workers face have become all the more apparent and urgent during this outbreak. So, many gig workers can't prioritize their health. They don't get to take time off if they're sick. They don't get paid sick days, and the companies they work for don't provide them like paid family leave. So if you're a gig worker on one of these apps, taking time off means taking home $0. Almost 2/3 of gig workers have said that they've had less than $100 in their bank accounts at some point this year. Pay is so low that these workers are not living week to week or paycheck to paycheck. They're living day to day. So the decision to take a day off of work during this crisis is a really heavy decision. And I think it's important that we just take a moment to think about our tech economy. If you're an engineer or an executive or a manager, you're not feeling well, or there's a community health crisis, you can work from home and seek medical attention. And that's really important for all those individuals, and it's really important for public health. If you're a gig worker on the other side of the tech economy and working on one of these apps, you can't work from home. If you stay at home, your income goes to zero. And you also are probably worrying if you can actually seek medical attention. Well before coronavirus was on anyone's mind, more than 1/3 of gig workers said that they delay accessing medical attention treatment because of low pay. So really at the core of this issue is economic insecurity. So I think the question is, how do we change this paradigm and raise standards and build power for app-based digital workers? And the simple answer is we organize them. That means using new and old tools to communicate with workers, share their stories, and move decision makers to action. Our approach to building worker power has been to center workers in all aspects of our campaign, both in the narrative shift work we're doing and organizing and policy development. So some of the strategies and tactics that we've used include quickly building trust with workers who are already talking to each other online in Facebook groups and subreddits, and organizing them in response to company behavior, like a change in pay algorithms. We've developed digital pay calculators that have been helpful tools for workers to calculate their actual take-home pay, but have also helped us build lists and collect data. And we've held digital strikes where workers withhold their labor until the apps go into surge pricing, which would then pay them more. We're also developing worker leaders and building local chapters, so we're doing some of that online to offline organizing. And finally, we found it particularly helpful to cultivate customer solidarity, especially around the issue of tipping. and aggressively using the media to do so. So I want to show you an example of this. 1 second. So here's a screenshot of a job an Instacart worker, so a grocery deliverer, did a little over a year ago. As you can see at the top of the slide, they spent about 70 minutes doing this job, so a little over an hour. They got paid for that hour $10.80. But if you can see in the breakdown of pay, Instacart paid them 80 cents, and the customer's tip was $10. So basically, Instacart paid them 80 cents for an hour, over an hour of work. When this worker, who was clearly confused, asked the customer service interface at Instacart why this was, they admitted it. They basically said the reason that we paid you so little was because the customer's tip. Essentially, what was happening is when customers were tipping higher, Instacart was paying workers less. So tipping raised Instacart's bottom line instead of actually going to workers. And Instacart did this, and so did several other apps, and they'd been doing it for months, and it was being hidden because of the pay algorithms. You couldn't tell what was going on. So a worker sent us this screenshot, and we were able to turn it into a viral story. It was on the cover of the front page of the business section of the New York Times, and in countless media outlets. On our website alone, our small community-based organization website, I think we got in 1 week, like 50,000 individual views on this and tens of thousands of other impressions in social media. And these months of stories about this tipping practice, really did spark national outrage. And even though Instacart initially denied this practice, they ultimately they reversed course and admitted wrongdoing, offered to pay back pay. And it was a really incredible moment of workers winning, and in particular, workers winning in solidarity with customers. And I think it's really important to talk about that because in worker justice movements, that's sort of rare that a customer would stand beside workers and say, wait a minute, this is wrong. But customers really understood and could feel the story because of how workers were able to share their stories through all of these outlets. And I don't think that we would have seen the change that we saw over the last year if it hadn't been for both workers sharing their stories and customers expressing their dissatisfaction with this. After Instacart changed its practices, Amazon Flex did too, so did DoorDash. And that was real major industry change. And it's been an incredible year for us in terms of getting a ton of stories out about this. And what that has allowed us to do is really shift the conversation about the gig economy and the future of work, where it centers less around business decisions that are being made by the companies and more about what the workers need. It's also helped us build our movement. So since this since the 80-cent screenshot has occurred, we've built a community of over 10,000 gig workers around the country. They work across different apps. We believe it to be the largest of its kind. They often come together using Zoom and other digital technologies, and they built this platform. So here's what they're calling for. It's a pay floor of at least $15. In Seattle, the minimum wage is $16.39, plus accounting for some expenses. Doing this work is very, very costly, and the workers bear the costs entirely. So we're talking about mileage, gas, depreciation. They also pay, their payroll taxes as independent contractors. So accounting for some of their expenses. We want to make sure that tips are always on top. That if a customer tips, it's free and clear, it goes directly to the worker and not to the company's bottom line. And finally, demanding transparency. Oftentimes these workers don't know what they're getting paid and why they're getting paid. And even before they have to accept a job, they don't know where they're going or how long it's going to take them. So if they're independent contractors, it's really important that they have all the right information to make the right decisions. And the truth of the matter is, because they're being managed by algorithms, all this data is readily available and easily shareable. And so what we want to do is put this into law and make sure that these are some of the basic standards and protections for these workers. Just yesterday, we launched our Seattle effort to pass local labor standards for these workers that would include these three pieces of the platform. And we're hoping to build off all the great worker justice success that we've seen in Seattle and Washington historically. And we're going to continue to aggressively use the media and our digital tools to focus on the problems that these workers face and to pressure companies to come to the table to raise standards. We're also going to explore new forms of worker power, from creating standards boards where workers and the platforms sit across the table and negotiate to raise standards across the industry, to developing new forms of worker organization that can address the ever-changing algorithms. So really just to wrap up, we have to ensure that the future of work, app-based work, digital work, is good and fair work. And one of the ways that we do this is by organizing these workers and bringing them together and sharing their stories to build power, to fight, to make sure that the future of work is for everybody, that works for everybody. So thank you so much.